I think when we come to the Prince Andrew, it's rather fascinating this, because I think a lot of people wonder how that iconic shot of Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein walking in Central Park, how was that achieved? It was achieved through a tip-off to Mazher Mahmood.
Who was Mahmood, the fake sheikh?
Whatever you do, don't tell Sophie I'm an Arab. That'll be the surprise.
Okay, let me explain Mazher Mahmood. Interesting person. He got a colleague to sort of stake out Epstein's house, and then they went to Ghislaine Maxwell's house. She overhears voices which are English voices, and she thinks to herself, they must be. Out walks Epstein and Prince Andrew. The real oddity of that was that the editor of the News of the World at the time was it Murdoch that held it back? That picture nailed Prince Andrew forever, because it was proving that Andrew was very much aware that he was dealing with a man who was a convicted.
I know it's annoying when creators ask you to subscribe, but since I started, the channel's grown 10 times faster. If you don't sub, YouTube probably won't show you the next episode. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Hit subscribe. Roy Greenslade, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
So I'm going to ask about Mazher Mahmood. First, give me a very brief rundown of you and your history in journalism.
Okay, so I've been a journalist all my life from the age of 17, and I've had a very varied career working for tabloids, but by the time I got to about 1986, 87, I went to work at the Sunday Times, and I'm managing editor of the news division there. That's where I first came across Mazher Mahmood, and I was influential in the reason that he had to leave the paper, because I found out that he'd taken part in an act of great duplicity. Having made a mistake in a story, he tried to cover it up by entering the computer room and so on. It was a long saga which led to his leaving. And soon after that, I gave in to the blandishments of a man called Robert Maxwell and became editor of the Daily Mirror. So I left the Sunday Times not long after Mazher Mahmood had left the Sunday Times, and I thought I'd never, ever see him again. I was in a different world, in a different sphere. So I had the pleasure instead of working with the almighty titan, Robert Maxwell.
Bloody hell. So there's so much that's going to interest viewers. And there's also, which I think we'll talk about towards the end, your recent situation around the IRA, and you profess support for them, I believe. We can talk about that during, back in the day you did, and we can talk about that afterwards. But I want to get into Mahmood
of course.
And all of that. Who was Mahmood? Let's get into that. Is it the fake sheikh?
Okay, let me explain Mazher Mahmood. Interesting person, actually born in Britain to Pakistani Muslim parents, raised in Birmingham. And his father was a really interesting man who sort of made himself into a journalist, became a justice of the peace, was well thought of in Birmingham, in the Muslim community, and in the wider community, really, acting as a spokesman. But most importantly, he launched a magazine and encouraged his young sons, Mazher and his brother Wazim, to take part in this enterprise. They would they would staple the magazine together. They would take it to the shops. They would go and collect the takings for the magazine. And in many ways, they were groomed into journalism. Both of them thought the media was rather glamorous. There were perks available. You got free this or free that. And so they thought, this is a profession I really want to take up. So even at the age of 16, Mazher was already writing an article in the Birmingham Mail, I think it was, in which he was expressing what I think haunts all immigrants, which is the relationship between themselves and the society they've moved into and how it affects them. And in fact, I think if one wants to seek out truth in Mazher Mahmood, his first ever article is a very truthful one about the difficulty one has about ethnicity holding one back, but at the same time being a springboard to ambition. So that's Mazher went from a 16-year-old would-be journalist. He got turned down trying to get in on the ground in local papers. Didn't really last at university, but one day I think he overhears at his parents' table some relatives and friends talking about how they make secretly covert fake video cassettes of Pakistani and Indian films and then sell them. And he thinks, oh, that's an interesting story. And amazingly, he decides that he's going to sell that in Fleet Street. Now, that was a really ambitious thing for a young man to do. So all praise for that. But unfortunately, he handled it in such a way that he gave away the identity of those friends of his parents, thereby sacrificing what we would call in journalistic terms, sacrificing his sources. And it's the first example of him being incredibly careless in the way he goes about things, utterly ruthless. Mazher Mahmood, I'm going to succeed, and it doesn't matter the consequences of what I do for other people. So that was his introduction to journalism, but it gets him, most importantly, known in Fleet Street at the News of the World and another newspaper, The People.
And the funny thing about him is, reading your book, I came to realize this guy is the archetype, or he is the symbol of everything that people complain about regarding the press, the Leveson inquiry before that, the tabloids. He is the guy, it seems to be. And yet, when you look him up, it's quite hard to find pictures of him. There's not much about him.
No, he cultivated secrecy, and his employers thought that this was a great selling point. So he's the only journalist to have a little silhouette rather than his face. And he convinced, when he gave evidence in court, he convinced through counsel, judges, magistrates, to conceal his face from the jury or from the base of the court, from the public gallery. So he maintained secrecy as part of his USP as a journalist. So you won't find very much. That the shot on the front of my book is a mugshot when he was finally brought to heel and arrested. And it's the only one we could easily have for free.
Oh, right. That's fascinating. And it's almost the only one there is. I mean, it's so hard to find anything.
Almost the only one. There is a bit of moving film of him with a hood on when he went to Westminster Court. I was standing at Westminster Court and I was trying desperately to lean forward, but he had minders around him. Otherwise, I could have pulled it down. But secrecy was very important to him. He cultivated it as part of his shtick as a journalist.
Interesting. And one of the things he came to realize is that he could interview royals or expose royals, and get them into all sorts of trouble. And that was big for newspapers. So he was heavily involved in some ways with Prince Andrew. In what way was he involved in that famous iconic photo? Well,
I think the important thing for Mazher was that he never interviewed people at all, really. He was an investigative journalist who went in under the cover. I think when we come to the Prince Andrew, it's rather fascinating, this, because I think a lot of people wonder how that iconic shot of Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein walking in Central Park in New York, how was that achieved? And I think we can fairly certainly say it was achieved through a tip-off to Mazher Mahmood. He got a tip that Prince Andrew was in town, and he got a colleague, Annette Witheridge, and a photographer called Jay Donnelly, to sort of stake out Epstein's house. They had no luck initially. I think they went, and then they went to Ghislaine's house, and I think Ghislaine Maxwell's house, and I think eventually, I think it was at Epstein's house, she overhears voices which are English voices, and she thinks to herself, they must be royal protection officers. And so she realized she might be onto something. At that moment, when she's thinking about it and talking to her photographer, Jay Donnelly, and she's not had time to ring Mazher and say, "Oh, I think you're right, Mazher, they're here." Not even that. Out walks Epstein and Prince Andrew. And of course, she immediately turns the car around and chases along, and she realizes as they walk into the park, she can't, in the car, follow them in the car. So Jay Donnelly rushes out of the car, the photographer, races into the park, leaps up on a rock that's on the side, and manages to take that shot that became famous. So in many ways, that shot is down. We don't know who he got the tip from. We don't know why he got the tip. And he got the byline, by the way, even though Annette Withridge and Jay did all the work, he got the byline for that story. But the real oddity of that was that the editor of the News of the World at the time, a man called Colin Myler, didn't put that picture on the front page and didn't use it at least until 2.5 months after it was taken. And I don't think we've ever heard the story behind the story about why that happened. I'm not on easy speaking terms to Colin Myler, one of the many editors that don't speak to me. And we go back a long way, used to be friends, but aren't any longer. But I'd love Colin to be able to answer that question. Was it Murdoch that held it back? Did the photographer not send it to him straight away? Why did he not give Annette Withridge her due in a byline? All these questions come up. But of course, they're unimportant to the public. The important thing to the public is that picture nailed Prince Andrew forever because it was able to be dated and it showed that he was still with him after Epstein had been released from his committing his sexual offences.
Proving that Andrew knew.
Proving that Andrew was very much aware that he was dealing with a man who was a convicted pervert, for want of a better word.
Yeah. Bloody hell. I guess there's two reasons that they could have delayed putting it out. One, they didn't quite realize what a big story it was, and two, there were pressures from above, and maybe that does make it a public interest matter if the royals are able to put pressure on editors not to print things.
We really don't know. My view is that there must be a story there, but I don't know. Rupert Murdoch was no fan of royalty. Prince Andrew was a minor, already fairly tawdry figure within the family, so it wouldn't be he wouldn't be mainstream within that. So it is a mystery. And maybe one day you can persuade Colin Myler to come and do your podcast here, and you can ask him that very question.
It's a really interesting one. I wonder if they just did they not realize how big the story was potentially? Do you think that's possible?
Why, even if you then eventually do it, why would you not put it on the front page? They had two really boring things about TV stars on the front page. Why would you not put it on the front page? It's been on funnily enough, ever since, it regularly appears on front pages. But the day the story, they broke it, it didn't. So it is fascinating. And we can't really imagine. As much as in my book, I say a lot about the power exerted by Rupert Murdoch in a negative sense over his newspapers, but he very rarely got involved intimately in a specific story or a specific picture. So I don't think it can have been Rupert Murdoch on this occasion. There must have been some other reason why it didn't appear.
Did the royals, with various newspapers, put pressure on to not release something and to release something else?
Well, there were obviously deals done between the palace and newspapers on occasion, but on this particular case, I can't imagine that was so. I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, there were lots of examples. In my book, I detail how the nailing of Prince Harry was all done. This business about whether or not he took cocaine or whether he drank a lot at the local pub near Highgrove, and that story broke and he was supposed to go off to a drug clinic and so on. All of that story was part of a very complex negotiation between the News of the World editor and Prince Charles's press aide, Assistant Secretary Mark Bolland. And I detail all that, and the Press Complaints Commission got involved. It was a really complex thing, and that was a good example of the way these things are done. But I don't think in this specific Epstein Andrew case that was so.
And so did that ever happen with you personally when you were writing a story? Did you have royals or anyone sort of, pushing you not to print?
The only time I had really connection, when I was editor of the Mirror, the only time I had connection with the palace was over a letter bomb that was sent supposedly to Princess Diana. And I didn't believe the story when my reporters brought it in. And the famous James Whittaker, who was the doyen of royal correspondence for many years, came in with a photographer called Kent, forgotten his name. Anyway, they came in and said, we've got this story. And I didn't really believe them. So I rang the palace. And I had one of those conversations with them listening in on a conference call. And I said, we want to be able to publish this story about a letter bomb being sent to Princess Diana. And they said we couldn't possibly comment on that. And I said, so if I publish it, do you think you might take action against me? And there was silence. So then I knew it was true. So that's how that's very often how you do these things.
Man, there's so much behind the scenes that we don't see going on. And another thing is that you worked very close with Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell. So what was he like?
Robert Maxwell was both, if you think about Donald Trump being both a buffoon and a monster, Robert Maxwell fitted that perfectly. You could laugh at him because he said stupid things, and was so stupidly arrogant. And in the time I was there, he did wild and crazy things. He interfered in a way that I'd worked for Rupert Murdoch in 3 different papers, and Rupert Murdoch never interfered intimately in the way that Maxwell did. If I took a weekend off, he'd sack a couple of people so that I'd have to come back and rehire them.
What?
And whatever, yeah. Lowly sports sub-editor or a sports reporter or whatever. So I was always trying to clean up after him. This is a very good example. When the first Gulf War broke out, 1990, he called up the photographer and reporter and asked them to go to his office. I was in Ireland, I think. And he called them up and had them in and said, right, I've got a man I want you to meet in Doha. And I want you to, he's got a lot of old encyclopedias that we bought, the Caxton Encyclopedia. I'd like you to go into the trenches and sell them to the American soldiers. And of course, they thought at first that he was joking, and then they realized that he was deadly serious. So I'm in Ireland, and I get a phone call from Heathrow Airport from the photographer saying, we've decided we're not going to go to Doha. I said, I've just assigned you the chance of covering a war. What are you saying? And they explained about Maxwell. And I said, well, just simply go. You're not going to sell encyclopedias, and I'll square you on that. And when I mentioned it to Maxwell, it was as if he couldn't remember that he'd even asked him.
Oh, wow.
Because that's the nature of the beast.
This is a true eccentric.
Absolutely. Yes, an eccentric, yeah. But he also, so that's a kind of funny and stupid example. But in fact, he was very difficult to work for. I only lasted 13 months with him before I just decided I couldn't take any more of the interference and the difficulty of dealing with him. But while I was there, often I would go up to his office late at night and spend time. He had this array, these cupboard, And if he said to you, would you like champagne? And you'd say yes. He'd say, what kind? And then when he opened the cupboard door, there was every kind of vintage champagne you could think of. Wow. So you could say, oh, I'll do the Bollinger now. I'll do the Moet tomorrow, and so on. So then we'd have glasses of champagne while he was making phone calls, pretending that he was speaking to Jacques Chirac in France. Or there was a famous occasion when he said to me, what's your front page tomorrow, Mr. Greenslade? And I said, well, there's been a sort of situation in Russia, in Lithuania, where Russian troops have gone back into Lithuania, as if it's almost a re-invasion of Lithuania. And he said, oh, that is probably completely bollocks, Mr. Greenslade. And I said, well, why is that? He said, because if Mr. Gorbachev was about to launch an invasion of Lithuania, he would have rung me first. So I had to put up with that kind of nonsense. But while I was there, I did meet his daughter, Ghislaine, who's become now a notorious figure in the whole Epstein affair. He indulged Ghislaine. He called his yacht after her. She was the youngest daughter. She was pretty. She was amusing. She was very light-hearted, and he indulged her more than he indulged his sons. I watched him operate with two of his sons, Kevin and Ian. He was very tough on them, but not at all tough on her. And one night I was in his office when she came in, and he said, why am I hearing from Senor, is it Senor? Well, anyway, Mr. Gianni Agnelli, that you've been misbehaving. You evidently put skis on and went out of a helicopter with his son and brought great perils yourself. Why are you doing these things? Why am I hearing them? And so on. And she kind of made light of it. So, Daddy, it wasn't quite like you described. And he looked at me and looked at me and went, my daughter. He was very proud of this woman. And I think when you think about what happened later, that he was found to have plundered the pension fund and, in my view, committed suicide because he couldn't face jail. Many people disagree with me. They think it was an accident. I think it's suicide. But I think when you think about how monstrous he was to the rest of the family, the strange nature of his suicide, the fact that he'd plundered the Mirror pension fund, and that he'd indulged her, you can see the possibility, and this is amateur psychology, I know, that she was seeking another Maxwell after his death, and that Epstein may have fulfilled that role. Very rich, very powerful, and she may therefore fall naturally into his clutches. I was with a man only recently who's a close friend of Ian and Kevin Maxwell, and they are utterly convinced that she is innocent still of all the charges, and that she is paying the penalty for Epstein, and that she's a scapegoat, in other words. Wow. I don't know where the truth lies, but when I listen to those women, can all of those women be making it up? I very much doubt it. But they are still convinced. Ian is convinced to this day that she's innocent.
That's her brothers.
That's her brothers, yeah.
Wow. But I mean, she was procuring underage women or girls. What was underage girl? What do you call that?
You call that procure? Yeah, you do.
Yeah, underage, teen, but you can't say underage women because they're not women yet.
No, that's right. No,
they're just girls.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've heard the evidence. It's pretty convincing, isn't it? I mean, if I think it was one woman, just Virginia Giuffre, you might say that's one woman making it up. But there have been 3 or 4. I've watched all the Epstein documentaries. I've read as much as I possibly can about it. I have that kind of journalistic interest in that kind of material and in power. And I think the fact that there's so much evidence would suggest to me that she did do it. But were they underage at the time? Were they where does the truth lie? I don't think we really know.
It's really
I think we may still be on the verge, by the way, of Trump offering her a pardon.
Oh God, we'll see then. And it's such a crazy thing to think of a woman in particular doing. I think we don't expect a woman to be doing that kind of thing, procuring women for. She must have known what he was up to, Jeffrey.
I think it was very important to Epstein to have a woman procurer.
Yeah.
And it's quite clear from what other women have said that he used other women to procure as well. Now, whether in procurement, did it mean that when you procured the women, you wanted them to befriend Epstein, or did you want them to perform sexual favors for him or his friends? We can't. I still think there's much more yet under oath to come out about the case.
It's really interesting what you say about the kind of daddy complex that she may have had in finding Jeffrey Epstein.
I admit there's a bit of amateur psychology about that, but I still think there's something to it.
Well, it must be to go to. I mean, did you see anything of a sort of sociopath in her eyes or anything like that?
No, I didn't. No, I mean, she was a kind of awful phrase, good time girl, but she was a playgirl. And I mean, I don't mean that in a critical sense. She was a rich girl, able to be indulged. She'd got her degree. Questions about that, but anyway, let me not go there. She got her degree from Oxford, and now she was just trolling the world, enjoying herself.
While we're on the Epstein-Andrew topic, I want to ask about what happened with Sarah Ferguson and Mazher Mahmood. I mean, what's that story for those who've forgotten?
Okay, so I think the important thing about Mazher was that, as my book details, lots of times he would be turning over relatively small-time criminals. People who were involved in obtaining illegal passports to help immigration, people who were illegal immigrants, and that was his stock in trade, as it were. But the News of the World were interested in personalities, and there are no bigger personalities than the royal family. So there was gradually over time, he realized that if I want to get stories that will run, stories that will set the news agenda, stories that will make me famous, stories that will boost my wages, boost my chances of bonuses, then I need to get members of the royal family. So he did 3 or 4 of them. He did famously the Countess of Wessex. He did Princess Michael of Kent. But probably his most successful in terms of the fuss that it caused was Sarah Ferguson, the then Duchess of York, and she is no longer. He caught her out, basically asking for money in order to provide access for. He was playing the Fake Sheikh at the time. I will give you access to my ex-husband Andrew if you pay me £500,000. So it was literally cash for access to a famous person. And this famous person, by being with you, could be useful to your business and so on. Now, whether or not he had prima facie evidence that she was doing this or not, I'm not certain, but I think he probably did have. And he then invited her to a hotel, and I would say some people have suggested he got her drunk. I don't think he did, because I think she was very, in fairness to her, very open about that. She said at the time, I was in a bad place. I think she was drunk before she turned up. But he videoed her taking the money and gabbling. I mean, there's a sequence in the book where she makes she's completely incoherent. Therefore, that story appeared, and it was a massive fuss because clearly there was a public interest in this particular thing. I think I don't think he did set her up. There was a public interest in showing that a minor member of the royal family, who'd married in and then, by the way, was divorced, was using her position in order to make money, to sell access to a member of the royal family to a foreign potentate, which is what Mazher Mahmood was pretending to be.
But then you make the argument in the book that it's maybe less of a public interest than you initially thought.
Actually, I do it the other way around.
Right.
When I think about it, I thought there was no public interest to begin with, but I've now since been convinced by a lawyer, friend, and I write about that, in which there probably was a public interest.
It's quite tricky, these things, isn't it? I mean, that's what you're always weighing up as a journalist, isn't it?
It's always, there's always this moment is, can this be shown to be in the public interest? There are plenty of examples in my book where I think he set people up, relatively minor stars, in such a way as you couldn't really see where the public interest was. There's a page 3 model who he convinced to buy drugs in Tenerife and so on. And she's a very nice person, actually. And I feel sorry for her. I feel sorry for John Alford, the actor who was very famous in a thing called Grange Hill, way before your time, London's Burning, before your time. He got 3 top 30 songs. I can't believe it, really. But anyway, this young man really went to jail because he bought drugs on the blandishments of Mazher Mahmood. I couldn't see there was a great public interest in that. Most importantly, and to show you that it's not all about sex, he set up this snooker player. I follow snooker.
Sure.
It's a bad thing, isn't it? I just love snooker. And there's this rather charming Scottish-Irish player called John Higgins.
Oh, yeah.
John Higgins is straight as a die, but he set him up in such a way through his manager, who wasn't as straight, and exposed him for being willing to throw matches, which was completely untrue. And I couldn't see there was any public interest there because, most importantly, there was no prima facie evidence at all that John Higgins had ever done that. He was going to make something like 350 quid or something. John Higgins could make that in 10 minutes.
So what did he show in the article, Mazher? He
showed in the article that he was. What he said was, I want to set up snooker in Dubai, and will you help me set up snooker in Dubai? I tell you what, will you? Is it possible to throw games? And Higgins is a bit suspicious about this, and he never quite says that he will throw games, but he didn't say that he wouldn't throw games, and that's how he was caught out. He didn't deny the possibility, and he thought the reason he didn't deny it, by the way, is because there were 2 heavyweights in the room who he thought were, and they're abroad when this happened in Ukraine, before any war broke out in Ukraine. He thought they were members of the Russian mafia, so all he wants to do is get out of the room without saying anything.
Man,
so it was a very unfortunate case.
It's so unfair. But so then Sarah Ferguson ends up walking out with what, $40,000 was it in a bag?
In the end, yeah, she walked out with a lot of money. Yeah.
So she got to keep that money.
She did, I think. Oh, I think some was paid back. I can't remember actually. I think some got paid back.
That's interesting. Bloody, and she's spoken about that since, hasn't she?
She has spoken about it. Yeah. She said it was a very low point in her life. Well, I mean, there have been so many low points in Sarah Ferguson's life, it's hard to choose one.
I know.
One from another.
I know. Well, and Andrew, I mean, many times has actually gotten involved in businesses that is that public interest part that you're talking about, where there's a. I think that's the other thing, that Prince Andrew's relationship with dodgy foreign characters was such that it was an interesting and possibly a legitimate reason to use entrapment in that occasion. I think entrapment is the dodgy thing that Mazher Mahmood did all the time, but we have to say that I feel the same way about phone hacking. I feel that if you used phone hacking for a totally legitimate reason, if you found out the Prime Minister was taking money from a foreign person and the only way to break it would be phone hacking, you'd be justified in doing it. I think entrapment's the same. What I think is the trouble is that phone hacking was used for
public interest reasons. Entrapment was used for non-public interest reasons. When you use it as a routine, when you use it against people like Millie Dowler's parents, or the people that were killed in the 7/7 bombing, if you do that, then you are not doing it for genuinely legitimate, good public interest reasons, and that is wrong.
My first ever job in journalism was at The Sun. I was doing night shifts mostly when I was 21, so we're talking 15, 16 years ago. So it was right after all that was going on. I think the Leveson inquiry was still going on, and we would receive emails almost every day saying, so-and-so has just been arrested, and we're giving him all the support, or her all the support we can.
Yeah.
Did you ever engage in phone hacking?
No. But then that was easy. I can answer that easily because there were no such things as mobile phones when I was editor. I think I had a sort of house brick as a mobile phone in 1991, in my last year as editor of The Mirror. And that was the first example of a mobile phone. So no, I can say definitely I didn't. And can I just say in defense, but since you've raised the subject of the Sun journalists who were arrested, that in the wake of phone hacking, the many people arrested at the Sun should never have been arrested. And they weren't arrested because they hacked phones. They were arrested mostly because they paid for information, which was described as bribery. And I appeared as a witness for one of them in court, and I offered myself as a witness for 4 or 5 others, and would have given evidence more often, but for the fact that judges, having already seen me give successfully evidence in court, didn't want to hear from me. But I am glad that most of them, nearly all the Sun journalists, got off. What I'm really sad about is that their contacts, their secret sources were exposed, the people they paid, and that many of them lost their jobs and did go to jail. That was awful.
That's crazy. That's number one rule in journalism.
That's exactly what happened. And that is why I condemn Rupert Murdoch, because Rupert Murdoch allowed that situation to happen in the sense that, and this is controversial what I'm about to say. So I know this is called Heretics, so I'm about to commit heresy. In my view, what the News of the World organization did in the wake of phone hacking was scapegoated Sun journalists after deleting emails which protected the real criminals in this enterprise. Many of the executives, for instance, emails were deleted to protect them, and at the same time gave evidence to the Metropolitan Police which led to the wrongful arrests of Sun reporters. And that was and remains a disgrace and is Rupert Murdoch's fault.
That's a travesty that was allowed to happen.
Oh, in my view, that is a criminal activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Regarding the phone hacking itself, I used to think at the time, I remember thinking, gosh, they must have these advanced mobile phones and things. Am I right in believing that all they did was call people's answer phone machines and guess the password like 0000?
Oh, I didn't have to guess it. So you could try somebody out because most people didn't change the factory setting. The factory setting would usually be, by the way, since you ask, is 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
But of course, people caught on to that in no time at all. So then you get the next bit, which is blagging. You know what blagging is?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So nearly all journalists blag at some time or another, pretending to be somebody they're not in order to get information. But what they did was hire private investigators, a battery of them, mainly, of course, famously Glenn Mulcair, and they would go to the mobile phone companies and blag the codes from them, or convince them to reset the original code, because that way they could then access the email, the voicemails.
Okay, so they'd go in and say, "I'm Millie Dowler," or you know?
Oh no, and it would be more subtle than that. It would be I'm Sergeant whatever from so and so. We're doing inquiries into that particular thing. We need you to read. They would pretend to be police, in other words, in order to get them to reset. Yeah.
That's crazy.
No, amazing though. But when they arrested Mulcair, he had 3,000 names in his book.
I can't believe that.
1,500 people have been paid off. 1,500 people have been paid money as a result of phone hacking.
In what, like who was getting paid? By whom?
But News International have paid 1,500 people. They have paid out millions of pounds to
people who were hacked.
For people who were hacked.
Did they give Hugh Grant a lot of money?
Hugh Grant, Sienna Miller, loads of people.
Bloody hell. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you suspect they'd rather have just not been hacked than get that money, no matter how much it was.
It's all according to the level of hurt. But, I think there are cases where people suspected their secretaries or their close friends of having given information to the newspapers because they believed I've only told that person. And in fact, it was being got off voicemails. So they cut dead their secretaries or cut dead their friends or cut dead their family in the belief that they were selling stories on them. I mean, that is, when you do that, that's the badness of the exercise.
One of the stories in your book that it made me feel really bad was also Princess Michael of Kent, as you mentioned before. What happened? I felt terrible for her. What was happening there?
No, I don't think one needs to feel too terrible for Princess Michael. I think that was a strange one. So she and her husband, Prince Michael, they owned a property in Gloucestershire, Nether Lipiot, I think it was, and they wanted to sell the house, and they couldn't sell the house. No one was interested. They wanted a lot of money for it. Probably wasn't worth that much. So one day, a sheikh arrives in a helicopter. I mean, this is the extraordinary resources that were given to Mazher Mahmood. Mazher Mahmood dresses as a sheikh, hires a squirrel helicopter, lands on the grounds, and makes her a grand offer for her house. As part of the celebration, this is one of his famous things, let's celebrate the fact that we've done this deal. And in celebrating the deal, she says rude things about Princess Diana, about Prime Minister, whatever, and then he reports on it. So he catches her out. I mean, she's the easiest. I mean, it's like shooting fish in a barrel to get her to say rude things. She's famous for saying rude things. But I don't think in fairness to her, she later said, I'll probably dine out on this. She wasn't that massively worried, and she didn't say anything that was too outrageous. It was a here today, gone tomorrow, and I think the Times wrote a very funny leader about it. I mean, there are far worse things than that. There was I think not many people know that there's a man called the Earl of Hardwicke, right? No. Okay, so the Earl of Hardwicke, a young man at the time, he's now member of the House of Lords and an upstanding fellow, but at the time he was, like many, a minor sprig of our aristocracy, not necessarily very rich. And he ran a scooter enterprise with a friend, Stephen Thwaites. And one day, a sheikh turns up and says, "You have 50 scooters there. I think I'll buy them all." And he thinks, well, I can't turn that down. That's too great. So they invite him to the Savoy, and him and his friend, and they say, oh, look, isn't this great? Well, it's great to do this deal. And he's sitting around with the sheikh and the sheikh's friend and the entourage, and they are having champagne by the gallon. He knows that the Earl of Hardwicke previously had a caution for having taken cocaine. So he says, look, why don't we celebrate here? Can you get some coke? And Hardwicke says, no, I don't know I can. He says, look, and he reaches into his pocket and he gives him 500 quid of the News of the World's money. And the guy says, oh, okay, he knows a dealer and whatever, and he does the deal. He ends up in court charged with dealing in drugs. Is exposed for dealing in drugs, charged with dealing in drugs, appears at Blackfriars Court. And when and he hired a very, very interesting lawyer, a barrister called Alan Jones. I know Alan Jones because Alan Jones represented Kevin Maxwell later when Kevin Maxwell was on trial. He's a brilliant lawyer. And he gets Mazher Mahmood in the dock and gets him to admit that he buys cocaine on behalf of Rupert Murdoch. It was an amazing, you are Rupert Murdoch's approved cocaine dealer then. Of course, Mazher is in the dock and he can't really swerve very easily. And he says, yeah, Rupert Murdoch knows what I do and so on, which is extraordinary. And then he takes him through the level of entrapment, the inducement to buy the scooters, the way the celebrations take place, the amount of champagne that's gone down before they do the cocaine deal. And the jury do something I can't remember a jury ever having done before or since. They go out to consider their verdict. These guys are obviously guilty. They actually did procure the cocaine, but they send up a note to the judge saying, if we'd been allowed to take into account the provocation that was given to them to commit the offense, we would have reached a different verdict. So we say guilty, but in these circumstances, we wish we didn't have to. And the judge, confronted by this, also does something extraordinary. Mandatorily, he's supposed to send them to jail. But he sends them to jail, but with suspended sentences. Okay. They don't go to jail. Suspended 18 months, suspended 9 months, and makes a big thing of it and makes a big presentation. And what's extraordinary about that, firstly, it's unprecedented that that sort of thing happens. But I took a great interest in that at the time. I was then media commentator on The Guardian, the beginning of what would be a 28-year stint doing that. I took a great interest in that. And I watched as over the years, each time there was a controversy involving Mazher Mahmood, we weren't allowed to quote that judge, to quote that judgment. So at the end of the book, as I say, 8 judges criticized his methods, but we weren't in any of the succeeding cases allowed to bring that evidence forward. So when Mazher Mahmood is finally caught lying in court, when he entrapped the singer Tulisa Kontostavlos.
Oh, yeah.
When he was finally caught out doing that, I was called by their lawyer and they said, will you come and give evidence on behalf of Tulisa? I would have been pleased to do so, but the judge wouldn't accept my evidence because the judge said, we're judging this case on these facts only, not on the track record of Mazher Mahmood. But it's that very track record which allowed him to continue doing the things he did because all his previous weren't able to be taken into account. And that's, I think, a great flaw in the way the law operates. In fact, earlier this week when I was launching this book, one of the people in the audience for the launch was none other than Sir Brian Leveson of Leveson Inquiry fame. And he came up afterwards and said to me, yeah, I take on board what you say. I wish that had not been the case.
That's interesting. So what brought about his downfall in the end, Mazher Mahmood?
He was caught. I mean, many times I'd raised questions. He ran a story about a completely fake attempt to kidnap Victoria Beckham, organized by 5 dissolute Albanians and Romanians, so which is total nonsense. But I'd noted that he'd lied in court on several occasions. And what caught him out in the end was an attempt to manipulate the evidence. Tulisa, he had no prima facie evidence that Tulisa ever dealt in drugs. It so happened, and I believe this to be the case, that she never even took drugs.
Really? She's
She's one of the very rare pop stars probably that never took drugs.
Seriously, though?
Yeah, seriously. She hated drugs.
Okay.
And she's in the back, when she's entertained by Mahmood, He tells her, by the way, I'm a prince from Dubai. I'm going to make you a star. I've got this idea that I'm going to star you in a film, and so on. And she takes the bait, foolish, but people are.
It's exciting.
They do take these things up. Yeah. So he convinces her that he's a film producer. He's going to make her a star. And he encourages her to try and celebrate, first of all, with drink, and then by buying cocaine. She doesn't know, and she doesn't take cocaine, but she gets a dealer who does do cocaine to provide the cocaine, and she's arrested for dealing. When on the journey from the hotel where he suborns her, she's in the back of the car. His driver is in the car. His chauffeur. He had a chauffeur. She says to a friend in the back of the car how much she hates drugs, because the friend says, was that a good drug or whatever? And she says, I hate drugs. I've never taken drugs. And the driver is interviewed by lawyers, and he says this in the back of the car. She said she hated drugs. Yeah. When Mahmood sees this, he realizes his driver is doing down his evidence. So he gets him to change his statement. But the lawyers find the original statement and the changed statement. This is held up to him in court, and the judge realizes that he's manipulating the evidence. In the manipulation, he also lied to the judge, because he said he'd never spoken to the man about his evidence, the chauffeur, and then he is arrested and charged with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice.
How long does he get?
15 months.
Okay. And then after that, his career's finished.
After that, his career was over.
People, please go and get Rogue. It's a fantastic book about Mazher Mahmood. A lot of the stuff we just touched the surface. There's so much more there. So go and get it. We'll put the link down below. Follow Roy Greenslade on the social media things and all those things. Hit that like and keep watching this channel.